I think it's a really challenging environment for the wine industry globally at the moment. Obviously, wine is flat in terms of consumption, and some of the research that's come out is showing that in the next 10 years, we could see up to a 20% decline in wine being consumed globally. Here in the Australian market, it's changing as there's greater beverage repertoire that consumers are buying into. But equally, post-COVID, we're especially seeing this real health and wellness trend. Right across the board, we're seeing a change in consumption across the sector. And that means we have to think differently.
Today, we get to chat to Trish Barry from Mastermind Consulting. She's going to help us get a better understanding of the role of marketing in the wine industry. I'm Jason.
I'm Trent, and we're here on an unfiltered, unapologetically unprofessional wine journey. And we're saying here, Jace.
Our saying is drink more, try more, learn more. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Trish, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We're genuinely excited about this discussion because the marketing aspect to the wine industry is something that we don't get to touch on, but it's also quite an important factor. It's important because it's what helps get the messages out to the consumers and for wineries to get their messages out. So really excited to hear more and hear about your journey.
Fabulous.
Before we do that, we jump into the icebreaker question from the wine house. So I'll hand over to Trent.
Okay, first one. You've been in the industry for a while. You must have tasted a lot of wines. Is that most memorable wine you've had?
Probably the most memorable was actually at a wine event that we were running for Sepult at the Melbourne Cup, where we had hired out the long room and we ran a media event for the top customers and the media around the Melbourne Cup. And we had an 1890 port from Sepult in the Barossa. It was still Sepult. Sepult's field in the Barossa. And just the most incredible bottle. We had paired wines on that day to Australian wine history moments and pulled wines from the cellar for that event. But that Australian story around Sepult's field old port, it was just like treacle in the bottle, and there was about this much left at the end that we got to take home. And it was a bit of a treat for friends who came for dinner parties ever since.
What did you pair that one with then?
Oh, cheese. And it was, it was at the end of the night and pretty remarkable. And when you think about it, we had, a 1952 Riesling when obviously Farlap had won, his race, and we had some Olympic wines and some really memorable sparkling Shiraz, some of the very early sparkling Shiraz from Great Western. That was just the standout.
Wow. Okay. So you had that one. Is it also wines that you still have yet to try that you still want to?
Like anyone in the wine industry, you die to taste a bottle of DRC. I think it's on my bucket list with a few wine people, friends who obviously we've tried some of the lower end Romney Contis, but I'd love to try the top end.
Or chip in, maybe.
Yeah.
Something to do before you die, right?
Something
bucket list.
Like that.
A person, past or present, they'd love to have a bottle of wine with.
I think there's, I would love to have had the opportunity to hear some of the founders of Champagne be able to tell their story. And Madame Clicquot from Veuve Clicquot, I just really am inspired by her journey and her story and what she achieved in really difficult conditions. And I think that she really pioneered the Champagne region and would be great to jump into her cellar and try a bottle of champagne and just hear her stories and her struggle. Alive, I think it would be great at the moment to sit down with the current Governor General. I would love to be able, so Sam Moyston obviously has just been appointed as the Governor General on the 1st of July. Really accomplished businesswoman. She's really touched so many parts of our culture, whether it's sport or female empowerment. She's really been at the top of her game, and I'd love to take her a bottle of something like a Best Old Vine Pinot Meunier and be able to talk to her about some of the histories of Australian wine, because who better as a spokesperson for us to get those stories out there than the Governor General.
Wow, awesome answers. Favourite grape varietal?
I drink a lot of Pinot Noir, but my favorite is actually Gruner Veltliner. And it was one of the varietals that got me into wine when I was traveling through Austria with a friend when we were at uni. So again, part of that memory storytelling that we drank a lot of great Austrian Gruner Veltliner, and you don't see it very often. But when I find a bottle, we buy it and we try it and we compare. I think it's part of why I love wine. It's so interesting to try something new and get to hear that story.
I love that, how it's something a bit more different, like Gruner. Awesome. We should go to drink more of that as well.
Agree.
Unique food and wine pairing.
A degustation, because it means you get to try lots of different wines and lots of different food, and then you don't need to choose. It's like asking you to choose your favourite child. There isn't one. I think it's about the moment and it's about the food, and so many wines just get brought to life with the different pairing of food. It's been really fun at the moment. We're looking we've been talking to Karina from Oliver's Taranga and looking at some of her Sagrantino and how she's pairing it with porchetta, and they've got an amazing porchetta party that they do down in McLaren Vale, and it really makes that wine really come to life when you pair it with a great food. So I would say a degustation.
Last one. Piece of advice for amateurs going on their wine journey.
Don't take it too seriously and just try lots of things until you find something that you like. And I think it's a really good memory. When we first got into wine, we used to have a book that we used to stick the labels into. And my husband laughs at me now because I still have this book, and it's like inspires great labels. But there were things like the Rosemount Traminer Riesling that I loved at the time that now, has its place in my palate evolution. But I think it's trying new things and having conversations and, trying it with food and being really open-minded to just discover something that might be different. So lots of people say they don't love Chardonnay, for example, but they just may love it without the oak. So it really is a matter of thinking about being open-minded to try something new.
So you still have that scrapbook now?
I do.
Oh, wow.
I do. It's not a lot of what I drink at the moment.
It's like collecting stamps or something like that. That's really cool, because I think for each one, it has its own memory as well. So I try and keep old bottles. I remember that bottle I had with so-and-so. So I still do that. It's probably easy to do the labels rather than the whole bottle.
To get ripped off as I was gifted with a book to be able to pull them off and put them in.
Cool. That's the icebreaker questions.
And it's probably a good intro into something I was curious about, because we do want to talk about the current consumer demographics and we want to talk about different marketing approaches. But I was super curious about how you got into wine and the wine industry. On your website, it says you had an interlude with wine and that got you hooked. What was the interlude? What happened?
Yeah, well, I was in financial services where I began my career. So I was at Macquarie Bank and I was doing investment marketing. And my husband, my now husband, obviously, we met in Hong Kong, and I didn't drink a lot of wine. So we would fly into wine regions from Sydney to Melbourne and, explore the Yarra Valley, or we'd explore the Hunter Valley, and we'd just discover different regions. And I figured, well, you could market wine much easier than investment banking products and private equity, which I was trying to market at that point.
Yeah.
So I did a wine marketing degree. I joined Australia's first digital agency when I was doing my wine marketing degree at the Uni of South Australia, because I had a business and a marketing, obviously, specialty from my degree. But there really is an understanding of how the consumer works, and the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia had some great courses. And so I did my graduate certificate in wine marketing and then joined Southcorp Wines. The week I joined Southcorp, it was taken over by Foster's. And I think I had 16 brands in that time that I was there. So it was a great opportunity to get to understand different consumers and different regions and work with the winemakers, and then you're hooked.
You would never go back to finance? No.
It's just not as sexy as the way I think of it, right? How do you market that? It's a bit hard. Okay, I'd say that's more than an interlude, but okay, that gives a fair bit of detail into that. That's really good. And I think from that, you probably had a lot of wines that helped develop your palate, but also a better understanding on consumers and and how it was back then versus how it is now, are you able to describe what's the Australian wine consumer market like right now, and how has it changed over the last 10 or so years?
Yeah, I mean, I've been marketing wine for 20 years now. So I've obviously worked on big brands like Rosemount, and it's a lot of the smaller family brands that I work with. It's telling their stories and helping them direct to consumer, where we do a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think it's a really challenging environment for the wine industry globally at the moment. Obviously, wine is flat in terms of consumption, and some of the research that's come out is showing that in the next 10 years, we could see up to a 20% decline in wine being consumed globally. Here in the Australian market, it's changing as there's greater beverage repertoire that consumers are buying into. If you think about what we had to drink 20 years ago and the volume of brands that we now have to choose from, that's obviously affecting choice. But equally, post-COVID, we're especially seeing this real health and wellness trend. So people are trading up a little bit. They're moderating their consumption. They're drinking very differently. They're looking for lighter styles. So I think it's not just a demographic piece. You don't just say the younger people are drinking this, because right across the board, we're seeing a change in consumption across the sector. And that means we have to think differently.
So the change is driven by lifestyle choices, but also the diversity of other drinks to consume in the market. Is that
Yeah, there's a number of factors that they're big ones. I mean, we do have in some markets an oversupply of wine, and I think we as a sector have a challenge to become very consumer focused. We have to be consumer focused and think about our competitors not just as other wineries, but, seltzers and, other beverages and other alcohol products or non-alcoholic products or low alcoholic products. So the breadth of choice to a consumer obviously is massive. And if you think about the volume of brands within our category, being able to stand out and really connect with the consumer is a challenge.
Do you think overall wine consumption has gone down, or just been so much more range that people being kind of confused and baffled with what to try?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at some of the data. Places like IWSR look at it from an age perspective. And so an over 60 market is still having wine as their number one beverage. So they're still drinking it that way. But from a younger demographic, and I'm talking maybe an 18 to 25-year-old, wine is part of their repertoire for special occasions, or they're not buying into it because they've got a much broader set of products that they can drink. So I think it's an exciting opportunity for us to think about how we bring those people into the category, because there's also some great research showing that the younger consumers are also willing to experiment. They want to try things different. They're looking for flavor. They're looking for experimentation. So it's the language and the way that we present those products to them that I think we have to embrace.
To your point, if the over 60s is still going to the wine, maybe the 18, 25s just think it's an old person's drink at the moment.
Well, some of it is. And I think COVID, some of the data that we've seen coming out of different markets have shown that, as consumers are changing their demographics, if you look at how increase of people that are moving back in with their parents. COVID really saw this whole change of people moving back home that might have been in their 20s and they're moving into a family unit again.
Yep.
And so the parents are seeing what their kids are drinking and the kids are seeing what their parents are drinking, and they're co-blending a lot of those beverages. So you think about Aperol Spritz, or you think about some of the other products that, you know, an over 60s crowd may not have traditionally had, and they're drinking more cocktails and they're starting to drink differently. So I think it's something that we've just got to be aware of. And
I see that also change. You talk about how people have to, I guess, adapt. It's more now kind of drink now rather than the big wines you kind of keep in cellar. I think whatever the stats are, like 90 to 95% of wines kind of get drunk within the first or second day. So it does kind of shine a light on there's different styles that's trying to change now. And have you seen that in the industry as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're learning a lot more about the vineyards and a lot more about the consumers. And, it's great talking to some of the families that have been around for a very long time that haven't just chased trends. So, a great example is the Thompson family of Bess in Great Western. They've been growing grapes since 1866. Redman in Coonawarra, they've been making wine since 1908. And they're very, very clear on what their style is and what they can do from those particular vineyards. But they're also really open to what they need to do to survive in the future and looking at different varietals or looking at the ways that they're making wine. Like Bess have made a white wine out of their Shiraz last year. So they're looking at what the consumers are looking for and being really approachable in how they kind of cater for that consumer. But that means being brave and also getting it wrong sometimes because we don't have a lot of research available, particularly the smaller brands, that show us what the consumers are looking for. So you have to often use your cellar door as a place to experiment and get that feedback.
And I feel like you've brought some wines for us to try, which kind of show that experimentation and trying to cater to different consumers here. And we might use this as an opportunity to try one first, which I'll put up on the camera. It's a 2024 Scarborough Offshoot Vermentino. And if you just want to talk through the story of this, but also interesting products that are coming out and packaging around it. Do you want to talk through the story of this first?
Yeah, so most people who know Scarborough is a beautiful family brand. They started in the Hunter Valley in 1987 and it's all about Chardonnay. So Chardonnay is what the brand is known for. Yellow Label is, an incredibly popular style. And they're not going to deviate, obviously, from Chardonnay, but the climate is changing and consumers are changing. So it's a great example of a brand that is thinking a little bit differently. Jeremy Scarborough and Liz Riley, obviously a dynamic duo of the Australian wine industry. They've planted Vermentino within some of their vineyards and it's climate resistant. It's obviously an interesting varietal to experiment with and it gives a different choice to consumers. So when you go into the cellar door, this is Sustainable Wine Growing Australia certified. It's obviously a really easy, approachable drinking style. It doesn't mean that Chardonnay doesn't have a place, but products like this have an incredible story to be able to bring a consumer in that may not have liked wine and may have been drinking a different beverage.
It's probably the third or fourth time I've had Vermentino in all of my tasting so far. So to me, it's kind of like an ability to get everyone trying different things, seeing what they like, having that diversity within the wine options list effectively. It's a great trial.
But I guess Jason kind of mentioned it. There's also new packaging around this Vermentino as well that's going to come through.
Yeah, so we're about to Scarborough are about to launch a spritzy Vermentino in a can that will launch in October. So it will be cellar door exclusive. There's 4 different varietals that are being tested in a can. Obviously, quality is of the forefront. So it is about making sure that we're talking to different occasions. And we saw the picnic movement really kind of take off in COVID. Post-lockdown, everyone was going for picnics. But as people are drinking less and they're drinking differently, we've really got to think about what the consumer is wanting and experiment with some different packaging. So a different format of wine in a can, lightly spritzed so that you get that real beautiful palette with a product like Vermentino or a rosé, or there is for the Chardonnay lover, a Chardonnay and a Tempranillo style kind of it's Tempranillo red as well. So yeah, 4 different wines to trial in a canned format.
Yes.
Which I think is really exciting to be able to think about different occasions. If I don't want to open a bottle at the end of the day, many consumers we know are living as they get a little bit older by themselves. So having a format that it means you don't need to have the whole bottle is really playing into that health and wellness piece.
Yeah. And 2 point before, just having fun with it as well. I think it's kind of fun packaging and also kind of ties in nicely with the summer as well, right? Kind of imagine one having kind of iced, ready to go and cracking that open. Still with a picnic as well, you probably could do it. I think that'll work well. Really refreshing, really zingy, really like those citrus flavors come through. Love it. But I'd love to see what it'll be like as that kind of spritzer style as well.
And the spritzer style, you'd think it's going to make it more approachable as well. Like if you're trying to delve into wine, you're kind of on the fringes and just want to see what else there is. That's a good kind of transition into the wine world. That stigma around wine in a can, like you've done a lot of testing. What have you found so far? Is it affecting the flavors? Is there any problems they're seeing with the wine in the can?
I think it's really early days, and I know that the AWRI is doing a lot of research around packaging formats and trying to find out, what is the shelf life. So it's really early days because wine has traditionally been in a bottle. We've seen, great Australian innovations like bag in a box that obviously put us on the map. But I think we've got to really be open. Like we're seeing wine in a pouch now. We're seeing wine in a smaller format. Like we've got to really think about how we're catering to occasions and does that meet the brand? Like not every brand should be putting wine in a can.
Yeah.
And I think it's also really understanding, well, where does my brand stretch to? Is this the right product and why am I doing it? Rather than just chasing a fad and saying, well, we saw brand X doing this and therefore we have to do it. You really need to understand who is your consumer, what are they looking for, and is this right?
We were talking earlier about it's about understanding the consumer, but also there's financial benefit in terms of cost of bottling a smaller format bottle versus a can. That's also something good for the business, also probably good for the environment, I'm assuming, in terms of getting those raw materials. So there's a lot of benefits out there. I think for me, I'm just thinking about the practical aspect of it. I've been at events where you've got a wine glass in one hand and a little small format bottle, and I'm holding the two together trying to pour it out. Very impractical. I could drop it, it's going to drip everywhere. I have it in a can. It's easy to hold around, have a chat with people. I can see practical uses for it as well.
And globally, we're seeing a lot more of it. So we're seeing some of the Provence rosé producers that are doing wine in a can. And, if you think about sporting occasions, that's a really, for Seppelt, back in the day, 20 years ago, when they were sponsoring the Melbourne Cup, we innovated and had the first PET 187 bottles that were obviously great on track at the Melbourne Cup because you couldn't have glass. So it's really, I think, testing things, trialing things, and over time, learning really quickly as to what kind of resonates.
Yeah. Using this one as an example, how does that work from the winemaker to marketing to the consumer? How do you join those dots and where does it evolve from?
I think it's different with every brand.
Yeah.
I often see that our role as a marketer is to be the person who takes some of those stories from the winemakers and translates them into something that has meaning to the consumer. Because sometimes the conversation with the winemaker is really technical, and that might work if you're buying a $150 bottle of wine that obviously is about a single vineyard and has a certain story. But trying to understand, what are they trying to do and what style, and how do you translate that to something that has meaning to the consumer is what a really good marketer does. Like, what is the channel? Is this on social media? What social media platforms are we using? How are we communicating it through our, database? This has been trialed, through the cellar door events to be able to get some feedback. We've seen some of these products tested and mixed with cocktails as a bit of a different product. So I think our job as a marketer is to really take that vision of the winemaker, or equally come with the insight from the consumer and feed that in. So some of these projects have been super collaborative and taking the learnings from what we're seeing with the consumers and then making sure that the product delivers on what that need is.
Do you think there's that tension then between the marketing and the winemaker saying, you'll come in and go, I want to put this into a can, and they go, what are you talking about?
Sometimes. Sometimes those crazy ideas get vetoed. But I think it's also a time thing, so that you're not just making sure that it's a fad. And if you've got a really good business case around it, I think that's also what a good, and I've come from finance. So, getting a good business case around it with this is the insight, this is the need, making sure that you're delivering on that has a commercial sense, not just picking something up off the shelf because you think it looks pretty. Like, I think that's where that intersection works.
So you're trying to balance brand, financials, consumer, winemaker, all in this kind of, I guess, narrow pocket to try and get it right.
Yeah, and we're a scientist as well. Like, you think about a winemaker as a scientist or a viticulture as a scientist. Like, most great marketers have also got a degree in marketing that is a form of science itself. Like, we're really analysing data and consumers and trends and, what is the brand and bringing that together. So my happy place is when I go out to the wine winery and spend time often with the winemakers. Most of them are some of my great friends because when you have that really good partnership and you respect each other, it's a really exciting partnership.
You touched on social media there, and I'm thinking about winemakers and their world, and I feel like it's very far removed from doing a TikTok video as an extreme example, right? The language and what they're focused on is just not that. How important is it nowadays for wineries to have that digital presence?
I think it's really important. And I say that coming from, as I said, like my business often focuses lots on that digital storytelling first. And that's because I came out of an agency, the first agency doing websites and Google ads at that time. And when I obviously started Mastermind 16 years ago, what I saw was the ability for digital and social to tell that story direct with the consumer. If you're a big brand, you often have different budgets that you can play with to be able to tell that story. But for a tiny family-owned winery, you have to have that connection with your consumer. And those brands that have done it really well have used that as a way to build relationships directly with their consumers as part of the digital mix. It's not just social in isolation. I think that's the really important part. It has to be part of a broader marketing plan. So building, your stories and being able to connect. And, TikTok's not for everyone. And I would say for a lot of wine consumers in Australia, it's not quite right.
Yeah.
Facebook and Instagram still plays a massive role, and Facebook is still a very powerful platform for storytelling, particularly when you look at the paid piece and how you can target some of the consumers with a really effective paid strategy. But I think it gives you that ability to be authentic and real and be able to talk to the winemakers. So even if they're not the ones doing the TikTok dance in the winery, which I would not always encourage, often being able to have a conversation directly with the winemaker or on a direct message on Instagram or send a message is a really good way of connecting and having that feel of a family-owned brand.
Yeah, I feel like going through our wine journey and meeting more winemakers and a lot of more boutique independent winemakers, the question in our mind's been, how can the regular consumer find them? If we're fortunate through connections and so forth to meet these people, but what's the right avenue? It sounds like maybe it's social media, maybe it's a digital market, but it sounds like there's still a lot of work to do to help discover those local independents.
Yeah, I think we've got better. I mean, we've run some really exciting campaigns over the years I've been in the industry. Like Rosé Revolution was a great example of bringing 52 wineries together that had a really small voice and really talking about proper pale, dry rosé in Australia. So it was a great chance to be able to collaborate and use some of the bigger players like De Bortoli that really pioneered this program, but have some of the little guys also have a voice and showcase their wines and some of those great stories. But equally, Bess did Australia's first tweet up, and it would have been, I think, 2009, 2010, where Twitter was, now X. So Twitter was the big thing, and we had Twitter falls in, a restaurant where people all around the country were connecting and hearing different conversations. We've been at the London Wine Food and Trade Fairs, where someone's walked into a room and we've been able to connect with that customer and start a conversation and get them to a stand to further those conversations. So I think it's, how you use it and having a strategy around it is important. But you're right, it's often those local family businesses. It's time consuming.
Yeah.
If you don't have a plan, you can spend so much time not necessarily making a difference. So I think we've come a really long way, and it's probably at the point where it's also getting really cluttered, and we have to continue to evolve and change because, 10 years ago, it provided a really big point of difference for brands that were on the platforms and you got great organic reach and you were able to, tell your stories in a way that was very different to what it is today in a much more cluttered landscape.
Yeah. So do you think print media still has a place to play, or do you think everyone's kind of shifting towards social and digital now as well?
Yeah, I think print, and we do a little bit of PR. I think print definitely has a role for certain consumers. Like over over 50-year-olds who are still reading a certain medium, but the page columns are getting smaller.
Yeah.
And digital has obviously evolved in terms of where a lot of information can be found.
Yeah.
And you have a look at the consumers that are under 50, social media still plays for the large majority of those people the number one way that they find a brand.
Yeah.
You know, word of mouth is important. Being able to recommend products is important. But social media, particularly for that younger demographic, and I hate to say young, like we're young, you know, but the 18 to 40-year-old age group, social media is still number one in how they're finding out about brands.
Yeah. No, definitely. I do like Instagram or Facebook, where you start to see the people behind the wine. And understand, you know, the process involved. And I just love that aspect. You do feel a bit closer, but then in a kind of, you know, weird way. Like, I do think that's important to kind of break down that kind of barriers around wine being unapproachable. When you get to see the people in the process, just real people.
And just talking through a whole heap of questions. I'm looking at my list of what to do. We've got another wine. We're super excited to talk about this one. I'll just show it up on the screen because it's slightly different branding from what we'd be seeing from Redman. It's a Redman 2023 Sanjo, but slightly different branding. Do you want to talk through that?
Yeah, so thank you, Dan Redman, for letting us tell this story. You're the first to see this label. So it is being introduced later in the year. And if you think about some of the traditional brands, I think it's really important that you respect some of the heritage. Like, it's easy to go, you know, we've got a new brand manager come in and change the label and, we've made an impact. But I think sometimes as a marketer, really understanding what the brand is about, and, you know, we call it iconography, like part of the DNA of Redman and part of the colour that is so recognisable is that yellow label. And, you know, they've made such incredible medium-bodied wines since 1908. And, you know, the Redman brand's been going since 1966. But all brands need to evolve. So having a Sangiovese in the range, you know, small, begin, test it. It's really, hopefully you'll love it. Medium bodied, quite savoury in style. True to Redman, but a bit of a touch of vision to the future. And you hopefully see that trend. Has been a lot of research going into how this product comes to life, like understanding what a younger demographic is looking for, understanding, you know, what sort of label cues they're looking for. That trend of nostalgia is an intergenerational trend because you tap into times that are happy or moments. So really trying to respect that in terms of bringing that product to the market has been, a privilege.
I genuinely like the way that it's been put together because I can see the linkage to the old traditional Redman branding, but it's not a complete departure. It's not like you've got Snoop Dogg on the label or anything like that. There's an absolute linkage, but it still makes it slightly younger, more refreshing. I really enjoy it. I really like the label.
They couldn't get Snoop Dogg, is that all?
We don't have that budget. A dog called Snoop maybe in the winery, but...
But the wine itself, we opened this up maybe about 30 to 40 minutes ago, and it's opened up already.
It's opened up, yeah.
And if you think about what people are looking for, they're looking for something like deliciously bright, you know, a great pairing with food, and, you know, red wine is what Redman does. So it's a really great way of keeping the brand relevant, tapping into that kind of lifestyle. You know, have it with a pizza, have it with a steak, have it with pasta, like have it with a salad. It doesn't actually matter, but it means that it's approachable and hopefully, you know, we tested a whole heap of different labels, and really important that as we did some online research and we had a look at what the different consumer groups were looking for, that we didn't alienate the customers that were really core because, you know, we really understood that they will be drinking this wine as well. So it needed to be able to appeal to, you know, Mel and Bruce Redman, who are third generation as much as it does Dan and Mike, that they really believed in it, but it didn't feel too out there, that it didn't feel like the brand.
Yeah.
And that's a big variation if you think about it for a brand. So they're also really brave. And that's also a great example of that partnership between marketing and winemaker
Yeah.
really thinking about what the consumer and working together.
And it's the first time coming from Limestone Coast. Typically, the grapes aren't sourced from there. Is that correct?
Yeah, typically there are 5 vineyards that obviously the Redman family own within the heart of Coonawarra, and a lot of those are very established vineyards. So this is an exciting opportunity to stay close to home, but allow you to have the right climate and the right vineyards to be able to bring something new to the table. There's also a Riesling in the range, and who knows what else will come in the future.
Wow. Well, we're so privileged to try it and see it. When will this be out?
It will come from cellar door, probably from mid-October.
Mid-October. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's definitely bright. There's kind of red fruit Sangiovese classic, but also has that kind of Redman kind of stamp on it as well. Has that kind of what I call that restrained fruit, but has that kind of dusty earthiness to it that also is present that I've seen in the Cab Savs as well through Redman. So it's interesting that I can see that signature from Redman kind of come through in the Sangiovese.
I think sometimes when you are, a smaller brand, you've got to be really clear of what you're trying to do and really think about how do you use your money in a really effective way. There's not a lot of money to be playing around with marketing. So you have to be really clear on who's the consumer, what are we trying to do here, how do we deliver to that, and then what is the messaging around that, because it's not also the language. And again, if you look at the language and the tasting notes on the back, it's also really important not to overthink it and make sure that it does feel approachable. So the front label is scientifically important to pull it off a shelf, and we looked at that. But equally, if they turn it over, flavour needs to be very important as to meeting what that consumer need is. It's a product that we just don't know what we're going to get. It's a bit of a lucky dip if you're a consumer and you pull something off a shelf. So the more that we can do to help educate them and give them those cues, hopefully we choose the right product for them.
I feel like we've talked for a long period of time, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface of the topic. There's so many questions. But I thought, was there any key ones that you really wanted to call out?
I think key ones is it's great to have Trish here today to talk about that linkage between, I guess, winemaker to marketing, because without the marketing, they wouldn't be selling the wines as well. So it's interesting to kind of live that kind of veil of mystery to understand how that all kind of works. So support local and get into these new wines and try some new things.
Absolutely. Trish, did you have any specific messages you wanted to get out to our audience? Anything about wine, marketing, Mastermind Consulting, any events coming up? Any key messages you wanted to share?
Yeah, I guess we do a really great job here in Australia of making some incredible wines, and we've got so much diversity around the different styles and the different regions that we have to play with. There's some incredible science being done in some of our, research institutions. We've got so much to celebrate in Australian wine, and obviously continuing to think about local, and you just talked about local, but supporting Australian products is also really important. Imported wine has a role, but, thinking a little bit about that homegrown messaging is also really critical, and thinking about how you're making a really big difference to so many of these family businesses by continuing to engage within their brands. It really does make a very big difference, and we're really lucky that we have this incredible agricultural sector with some really talented people, from the vineyard, some of the amazing vineyard stories, that often don't get the light shed on them, of some of our viticulturalists who are doing world-leading work, through to the marketers and some of our communicators that are up against the best of the world. We have so much to celebrate, but often wine is, not as thought about as we in the sector think about it. It occupies such a small part of the consumer's brain. So we need to keep telling the story in a way that kind of matters to them and resonates to them, but also recognizing that it often matters more to us as a profession than it does in that life of the consumer. So keep trying new things, keep being innovative. I think that's what's been really exciting for us as a 16 years of working in wine marketing at Mastermind this year, continuing to evolve and doing things differently and trialing things, and, not standing still is the privilege of being in a sector that is really, continues to be exciting.
Yeah.
And I think the two wines that we've been able to sample today are a perfect example of that innovation and just trialing new things, testing it out, seeing what sticks. I think the thing that I've picked up from this conversation is marketing is complicated. It's not just some fluffy thing that going around. It is scientific. There's a lot of data involved. I love the fact that it's always going back to the consumer to test it and trial those theories, because if we're doing something outside of what the consumer wants to enjoy, then there's just no point. So it's a critical role. And I think, what I said at the start, it's a critical role to getting wine out to the consumers and for consumers to better understand wine. So great knowledge that you've shared with us today and great stories. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got all a job. There's some really great marketers that we are the champion of the consumer. And if we're thinking about what the consumer's needs are and then thinking about how that brand works, that's a really important partnership to bring to a business that's not thinking just about the manufacturer, from what we're producing and how do we fit that. Like, they're the brands that are doing a really great job of thinking about how they're evolving or staying relevant or, telling their story in a very consistent way through different mediums. And social media often gets a lot of buzz around, should we be on a new platform? Yeah. But realistically, it's another communications medium to talk to the consumer, just like the telephone was at its time, just like email has been a really big part of it. So thinking about how we do a good job of being able to connect and tell a really authentic story is what the job of the marketer does. But that, as you touched on, is packaging, product, where it's sold, the messages around it, the advertising approach around it. It does often get lumped into a pretty label territory, which is what everyone has obviously a say on subjectively. But, a good marketer is able to think about a lot more than that.
Completely agree. Look, Trish, I want to thank you for your time and sharing all of that with us. So we're going to wind it up here. I think certainly look out for the Scarborough Vermentino and the Redman Sangiovese when it's out in the market. I think that'll be very exciting. Hope everyone gets to taste it. We'll wind it up there. As we like to say here, drink more, try more, learn more. Thanks all.